At the end of a quiet street behind a fence, two little girls in tattered pink dresses knelt, scrubbing a filthy floor, while a man's drunken rage roared in their ears. Most of the neighbors turned away, pretending not to hear. But a soldier named Silas stopped, his German shepherd standing motionless beside him, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the screams inside. What he saw through the crack in the door was more than abuse. It was a trade waiting to happen, a man willing to trade children like cattle. And at that moment, Silas understood. This battle would require more courage than any he had ever fought. Would he step through the gate, or would the twins disappear before anyone dared to act? Fog lay low over Sprague Avenue like breath on a mirror, blurring the rail line, the bare cottonwoods, the sagging bungalow whose window panes trembled at each distant freight horn. Inside, two little girls in ragged pink dresses knelt on a warped plank floor, scrubbing an oval of dirty water that kept widening no matter how they chased its edge. Maisie, older by 8 minutes, was small and fine-boned with a stubborn cowlick that never lay flat. She worked in tight, careful circles, lips pressed thin, the way she'd learned to hold back tears. Mira, left-handed and quick, moved faster, humming broken pieces of a lullaby as if sound could stitch bravery to her hands. They had their mother's eyes clear gray, watchful, in the faintest dusting of freckles that showed even through the grime. Their dresses had once been church pink, but now hung in threads, hemline lace snagged like caught cobweb. Above them paced Royce Cutter, a man of 40-something with a bulldog jaw, coil spring shoulders, and a face mapped in tiny red lines, like a county with too many roads. He wore a patched mechanic's jacket that always smelled of old oil and cheap rye. His knuckles were raw from something that hadn't been a repair. He had once worked the loading docks, the story went, before he let payday slip through the slot machines at the Blue Lark and learned the sin of telling lies to men who kept ledgers. Shame rode him like a second skin. He handled it the only way he knew, by kicking downward. On this morning, he had already done his first ugly magic. One sharp boot turned a bucket into weather, and now the girls chased a man-made storm. "Faster," he growled, voice thick with last night's drink. "If I see a streak, you start over." He didn't look at their faces. He loved not looking at things. Outside the gate, a man and a dog stopped in the hush after a freight horn. Silas Ward wore his field jacket like a habit he couldn't shake. He had the rangy build of someone who had carried weight across heat in hills, a scar along the second knuckle where a rifle bolt had taught a lesson, and a quiet that clung to him the way fog finds low ground. His hair was regulation short because old orders have a way of echoing. His eyes were a calm brown that turned hawk sharp in an instant. A decade of service had taught him the geometry of danger. Distances, lines of sight, the math of help versus harm. Somewhere in his ribs he carried the pop of an IED and the memory of a kid named Murphy whose laugh never made it home. Afterward, certain sounds, the slam of a metal pail, the wrong kind of silence could snatch him back by the collar. He had learned to breathe through it, 4 counts in, 6 out, until the world steadied and the present remembered him. Beside him, Valor, the black and tan German shepherd, stood in a perfect heel as if someone had drawn him with a ruler. He was all clean lines and quiet power, an athlete who had traded velocity for precision. His ears cupped the sounds of the yard. His amber eyes tracked what the nose already knew: stale rye, cold ash, hot fear. Valor's coat lay sleek over muscle meant for work. There was a faint white nick on one ear from a winter fence, a reminder that even grace can snag. He had once dragged Silas 2 yards off a live lane when July fireworks turned the world into a bad memory. Since then, a pact existed. Silas would read the scene, Valor would read Silas, and between them the ground would speak truths no one else heard. Through a crack in the door, soldier and dog saw the oval of water, the quick hands, the boot pacing like a metronome set to cruelty. The house itself seemed to wince. Roof shingles lifting at the edges, porch steps shiny where knees had polished them, a fence leaning like an old man who needed to sit. Silas took in the map without shifting his weight, gate to well 9 strides, well to kitchen threshold 6, with a broken board on 2, Porch to chicken, run 12, open sightline, window to street, low sill, bad latch. He catalogued smells, mildew, cigarettes, the tang of fear when a child knows she is being watched for the wrong reasons. His breathing tried to climb. Valor leaned, a firm press against his right shin, the old battlefield tap that translates to, "I've got you." From the porch, Royce's shadow crossed the door. He flicked a glance toward the crack of light, the way men do when the world pins them for a second and they don't know why. He cupped a cigarette. The flame ghosted his face, a brief theater of hollows and ridges. "When I say smile, you smile," he said, words like a drill bit. "When a man comes, you say, 'Yes, sir,' and you don't look at me for help. You don't need help. You need to earn your keep." His voice snagged on earn as though the word were a fishbone. Maisie's hands didn't pause. Mira's hum hiccuped and went small. Silas felt the familiar pull-kick the door, take the blast of it, end the scene with force, and then the second pull, colder, heavier. The part of him that knew force closes a moment and opens 10 worse ones if you don't lay a longer plan. He watched the way the girls used the rag, how they worked the mess to the edges, how Maisie's gaze darted, measuring Royce's feet the way you watch a storm and decide if you can make it to the shed. He pictured paperwork, sheriffs, a judge. He pictured the opposite quiet men at the Blue Lark who settled debt by moving trouble like furniture. "Easy," he whispered, a word meant more for his chest than for the air. Valor's ears tipped. A question. Silas crouched by the fence and put 3 knuckles to the wood tap. Tap, tap. The sound you make when you want a bird to know you're a friend. Valor gave a single soft bark, a breath-thin thing, more exhale than sound, the canine version of a hand raised without threat. Inside, Mira's head lifted a fraction. She looked at Maisie, then toward the wall as if secrets could pass through grain. From the other side of the plank, Silas tapped twice in the same rhythm, low and patient. 2 beats answered, quick as a pulse. They were listening. In the neighbor's yard, Edna Whitlow straightened from her lavender bed and peered over the sagging fence. Edna was 68 and had the rugged beauty of a woman who spent more years in wind than in mirrors. She wore her gray hair in a roll and her cardigan like armor. She had tried, in small ways, leaving muffins on the stoop, calling once to the county hotline that put her on hold long enough to finish knitting a scarf and then told her to document patterns. She watched the soldier and the dog as if she had been waiting for this specific shape of help. Silas didn't look up, but he felt the weight of a witness and was grateful. Royce swore and stalked to the counter. Bottles chimed. "Stand and face the door," he ordered. The girls rose together, 2 stems learning to straighten and win. Silas shifted so only one eye met the crack, so the square of his shoulder wouldn't silhouette. Valor's tail lowered another notch into stillness. Every tendon spoke of restraint. The freight horn sounded again, farther now, like a promise that everything moves, even this. Silas memorized the last details he needed. The way Royce reached with his left hand, the limp that favored the right knee, the lazy arc of his boot. He caught a half glimpse of a notice tacked by the stove figures scrawled, dates underlined, debt talking in permanent marker. Then he eased back from the crack as if stepping away from a skittish animal. Valor flowed with him, a shadow unhooking. At the fence, Silas pressed his fingers to the wood once more. Tap, tap, tap. Valor breathed the soft bark. From inside, 2 taps, brave and small, a ritual born. "We'll come back," Silas said, and even the fog seemed to nod. He and Valor moved down the sidewalk, past Edna's lavender and the mailbox with its red flag stuck at a tired angle. Edna's voice, not much more than a breath. "Blue Lark opens after 4. He didn't turn, but he lifted 2 fingers. Thanks without asking for more. He would need a sheriff who still believed paper could hold back a tide, a lawyer willing to fight for free, and time measured not in hours but in turns of a windmill on a lean porch. He would need to be a different kind of brave, the kind that waits outside a door, listening for small hands to answer from the other side. In the days that followed, dawns came brittle and blue. Silas walked irregular circuits past the house, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a thermos meant for small hands. He counted porch lights on, Off, on again. He learned the cadence of night voices. He noted which trucks idled too long at the curb. Valor adapted his tasks to the new theater. He would carry a cookie flat on his nose to the fence and release it at a whisper, as if delivering mail to a kingdom under siege. He learned to place his bulk between Silas and the gate without blocking the sight line to the kitchen. He made children. Safe become a verb he could do. Once, a train clanged past with a screech that could have been Baghdad. Valor leaned hard, a living weight belt, and Silas rode the noise like a wave until it went thin. In a hardware store window, Silas caught a reflection field jacket, dog, a man who looked like he knew how to wait, and recognized the strange humor that sometimes saves us. His dog had better posture than he did. He bought a small windmill kit and a packet of mint seeds and slipped both to Edna with a nod. "For when the day is right," he said. She tucked them into her cardigan as if they were medicine. That evening, the bucket fell again. The oval on the floor grew, and with it the orbit of two girls who had decided quietly that survival is also a skill. Silas stood at the fence and sent the pattern. 3 taps, a soft bark. From within the house 2 taps, then, unexpectedly, a third, like a hiccup of courage. "Atta girl," he said to the dusk, and Valor's ears flicked as if agreeing. Maps complete, ritual set, the soldier and the shepherd faded into the fog, carrying with them the blueprint of a battle that would not be fought with the muzzle of a gun, but with patience, paper, and the precision of love that refuses to look away. The lavender bushes in Edna Whitlow's yard bent slightly in the early autumn breeze, their faded purple heads releasing a tired but stubborn fragrance. Edna, 68 years old, had the sturdy posture of someone who had spent most of her life working the soil. Her palms were broad and calloused from years of nursing lavender plants through winters that bent other gardeners into quitting. She lived alone now, a widow since her husband's tractor accident nearly 20 years ago, and since then her home had become a refuge for stray cats, half-broken birds, and the kind of children who lingered outside her fence, hoping for a cookie. That morning she leaned on her rake, watching Silas crouch by the rough planks of the dividing fence. His hand rested near the wood, knuckles waiting, while Valor sat square beside him, amber eyes on the kitchen window. Silas had returned 3 times since that first fog-soaked encounter. Each time he came without ceremony, carrying a small offering. Once a roll of clean bandages wrapped in wax paper, another time a dented thermos filled with cocoa that still smelled of cinnamon, and now a small box containing a toy windmill with bright red blades. He never tried to step inside the cutter yard, never reached for the latch. He simply left things near the fence and tapped the pattern. 3 slow raps in Valor followed with a single quiet bark. The girls answered as they dared. 2 taps quick and timid, or sometimes the faint rustle of breath pressed against the wood, as if they wished to speak but didn't trust the walls. On this morning, Maisie and Mira took the windmill kit with wide eyes, their fingers moving clumsily at first before gaining confidence. Silas didn't guide them directly. He only passed a screwdriver through the gap between boards, letting them own the moment of construction. When the wind caught the blades and spun them for the first time, the twins laughed, not loudly, but enough to lift the air like a bird rising from cover. Valor's tail brushed the ground once, slow and approving. Edna moved closer, lowering her voice until it became the texture of gravel on stone. "You should know, folks here keep their mouths shut," she said, eyes narrowed at the Cutter house. "That man's got friends at the Blue Lark and 2 cousins in Town Hall. Last winter, I thought about calling Child Services again, but the call ended with my name written where I didn't want it. They made sure I knew it wasn't worth the trouble." She shook her head, adjusting the wool shawl on her shoulders. "Everyone sees it, Sergeant." Few dare to act. Silas studied her with the same care he gave a map. He noted the stoicism in her jaw, the tremor in her left hand that betrayed her age, the bitterness that had grown roots in her tone but hadn't choked her compassion. He nodded, pocketed the information, and turned his gaze back to the twins, who were now whispering to each other and touching the spinning blades as if they were handling a miracle. That afternoon, Silas took Valor into town. The narrow street smelled of roasted peanuts from the corner store, the kind of scent that made memory slip between decades. The bell above the tattered door jingled as they entered. Behind the counter stood Harlan Keats, a man in his late 30s, with spectacles always sliding to the end of his nose, a threadbare blazer over a shirt missing a button, and a briefcase perpetually tucked at his side. He had the weary eyes of someone who read more case files than he slept hours. But there was a poet's cadence in his speech, a rhythm that suggested he believed words could still save lives. He ran a small legal aid desk inside the store, often paid in pies or homegrown tomatoes. Silas placed a folded scrap of paper on the counter license plates he had recorded, times of lights flicking on and off, fragments of Royce's slurred threats overheard through thin glass. Harlan glanced at it, then at Silas, then down at Valor, whose calm stance was its own testimony. "Sheriff Pike's the one you'll need," Harlan said quietly. "She doesn't scare easy, but she won't move without something solid." Sheriff Lenora Pike was known in Spokane Valley for her spine of iron and her refusal to owe favors. In her mid-40s, she carried herself like a woman who had chosen the badge not for power, but because she was sick of watching other men mishandle it. Her hair was clipped short beneath her wide-brimmed hat, her dark eyes sharp as rifle sights, and her uniform always seemed to have just been pressed, though everyone knew she did her own ironing. A decade earlier, she had stood down a violent protest almost single-handedly, refusing to fire a shot, simply holding her ground until tempers broke before her resolve. Since then, she carried the nickname Stone Pike, which she accepted with a smirk but also with a gravity that warned others not to test it. When Silas met her in the sheriff's office, the ceiling fan turned lazily above, scattering motes of dust across the clutter of case folders. Pike listened as he laid out his observations, his notes, Edna's whisper about Royce's boasts. Her expression remained unreadable, but her hand tapped once on the desk, the rhythm of someone measuring possibilities. "You've got suspicions," she said finally. "You've got witness statements off the record. But courts don't work on suspicion. I need evidence pictures, recordings, dates that line up. Otherwise, Royce Cutter walks, and those girls go right back to him." Her words carried the cold precision of truth, the kind soldiers recognize in the field. Sometimes you see the threat clear as daylight, but until the order comes, your rifle stays lowered. Silas nodded. Valor shifted closer to his chair, steadying the silence between heartbeats. Back outside, Harlan adjusted his glasses and spoke softly. "You build a net, Sergeant. Not too tight, or it breaks, but not too loose, or he slips through. Lawful surveillance, documented patterns. That's the only way." He paused, then smiled faintly, almost apologetic. "I've spent my life writing words to shield the vulnerable. Sometimes the words hold, sometimes they tear. But you've got steadiness." That may be the difference. Silas thought of the girl's small hands tightening screws on the windmill, of their laughter rising like fragile wings, of Valor's quiet bark against the boards. He knew the kind of courage required here was slower, heavier than the battlefield. It meant waiting outside fences, recording shadows, turning love into paperwork. He had never fought this kind of war before. Yet as Valor pressed against his side once more, Silas whispered to himself, "We'll build it, knot by knot." The Blue Lark smelled of spilt whiskey and yesterday's fights. Its neon sign buzzed like a dying hornet above the crooked door, and the regulars hunched at tables with their debts folded into the cracks of their faces. Royce Cutter fit in here the way a rusted nail belongs to old wood, part of the structure, but always on the edge of breaking. He sat near the back, shoulders hunched, counting coins that didn't add up. Across from him loomed Jacko Red, his creditor, a man with a belly that pressed against his shirt buttons and tattoos creeping down his thick arms. Jacko was in his mid-40s, with a shaved head and a scar across his chin from a bar fight that he liked to retell as though it made him a war hero. He dealt in favors, cash, and threats, always speaking softly at first like a friend, before landing words sharp as hooks. His grin never reached his pale eyes. Jacko leaned closer to Royce, tapping the table with a thick finger. 6,200, end of the week. Or you paying something else?" Royce swallowed, the sound loud in the stale air. Meanwhile, outside the Cutter bungalow, a quieter operation was unfolding. Sheriff Pike had signed the paperwork that morning, a lawful surveillance permit tucked inside her neat folder. Harlan Keats, glasses sliding down his nose, helped Silas position the first camera in Edna Whitlow's garden. Disguised among lavender stalks, another lens, no bigger than a coin, was fixed into a hollow of the porch beam opposite the kitchen. Silas carried a fountain pen that held more than ink. Inside, a micro recorder waited to capture words that couldn't be denied in court. Noel Spears, the caseworker assigned by Pike, arrived just before dusk. She was 33, with tired green eyes, a coat frayed at the cuffs, and a way of carrying her satchel like a soldier carried gear. Noel had grown up in foster care, moving between 5 homes before she turned 12. That past made her both relentless and gentle. She spoke softly to children but wrote her reports with a firmness that could cut through bureaucracy. When she first stepped into Edna's kitchen to review the camera feeds, she knelt to Valor's height and let him sniff her hand. "Good eyes," she murmured, recognizing the steady alertness in the German Shepherd. The recordings began to accumulate. Footage showed Maisie and Mira eating thin scraps while Royce devoured the main portion. Another night, the girls were ordered to smile and call a stranger "sir," while he dropped off bottles of liquor in exchange for who knew what promises. The pen recorder caught Royce's voice slurring threats. "You'll earn your keep one way or another." As the twins pressed together on the floor, rags clutched like shields. Through it all, Valor became a silent part of the evidence. He stood at thresholds when Royce raged, a dark outline between Harm and the girls. He carried crumbs balanced on his nose to the fence, making the twins giggle before they whispered secrets only he could hear. Later, they shared those fragments with Silas, how Royce talked about selling the whole place, how he muttered names of men at the Blue Lark. Valor's patience coaxed words where fear had locked mouths. Silas anchored hope in the smallest rituals. Each evening, he poured cocoa into the chipped enamel cup, saying a quiet grace before sliding it through the fence. He left a blanket folded neatly with military corners, teaching Maisie how to tuck the fabric to keep in warmth. The windmill on the porch spun slowly in the frost, a marker of their quiet bond. It wasn't grand gestures, but tiny consistencies that told the girls they were not invisible. One night, the hidden camera caught Royce pacing, debt slip crushed in his fist, while he barked at the twins to practice their manners. His voice cracked with fear he tried to bury under rage. Outside, Silas watched the feed with jaw set. In town, Jacko pressed the deadline again, voice oily with satisfaction. "You don't pay, Royce. You lose the house. And maybe more." The net was tightening, each knot tied in silence pictures, recordings, testimonies whispered first to a dog before they reached human ears. And though Royce believed he was still the master of the house, the truth was shifting beneath him, grain by grain, caught by lenses he didn't know existed, and steadied by the loyalty of a soldier and his steadfast hound. Rain drummed steadily on the corrugated awning of the Blue Lark, pooling in oily puddles that mirrored the neon sign flickering in the storm. The back room was dim, lit only by a hanging bulb whose pull chain swayed in the draft. The table in the center was scarred from years of dice and cheap knives, the kind of surface that carried memory like grooves in bark. Silas Ward sat on one side, his posture calm, jacket collar turned down, briefcase resting on the chair beside him. Valor lay under the table, body stretched long, ears pricked but unmoving trained patience carved into muscle. The air smelled of liquor and mildew, thick enough to choke a weaker man, but Silas had learned to breathe slowly, the way he had in desert tents when waiting for orders. Royce Cutter entered with the swagger of a man already drunk on his own scheme. His mechanic's jacket was damp, collar stained with sweat and ash. His thinning hair clung to his forehead. His eyes carried the red veins of sleepless nights and panic suppressed beneath bravado. He slammed a bottle onto the table before sitting, flashing the crooked grin of someone who thought he was the smartest man in the room. Behind him, Jacko Red lingered by the door, arms crossed, a watchman and vulture both. Royce leaned forward, lowering his voice as if conducting serious business. "So you're interested in property," he rasped. "Not just land. I can give you the whole package. House, fields, everything inside." He paused, letting the phrase hang, then added with deliberate weight, "That includes the girls. You take them, you deal with them. No court, no questions. Quick and easy." Silas kept his face unreadable, though inside every muscle tightened. His hand rested lightly on the briefcase, fingers brushing the recorder hidden within. He needed the man to repeat, to bind himself with his own greed. "I don't like misunderstandings," Silas said evenly. "Say it again. What are you selling, and what's your price?" Royce chuckled, mistaking composure for weakness. "All of it," he boasted. "The land, the shack, and the twins. They're nothing but baggage anyway. I'll let it all go for a fair number. You walk away with a farm and 2 extra hands, or toys." "Your choice." His laugh was sharp, broken at the edges. Valor stirred, ears flicking. Silas pressed his boot softly against the dog's flank, the signal to hold. Royce leaned back, scribbling a number on a scrap of paper, sliding it across the table like a gambler, certain of his hand. "That's the deal," he sneered. "Take it or leave it." Silas inhaled once, letting the silence stretch until even the rain outside seemed to listen. Then he closed the briefcase with deliberate calm, the click echoing like a gavel. He raised his eyes, voice steady as stone. "This contract is worth nothing." The words struck like a blade. The back door burst open as Sheriff Pike strode in, rainwater on her hat brim, 2 deputies at her flanks. "Hands where I can see them," she barked. Jacko bolted for the hall, but 1 deputy tackled him against the wall. Royce surged up, knocking the chair backward, spittle flying as he cursed. "Set up! You can't do this to me!" He lunged, but Valor shot from beneath the table like a released spring, placing himself squarely between Royce and Silas. Teeth bared but silent, the embodiment of controlled power. Royce froze a fraction too long, enough for Pike's deputy to snap cuffs around his wrists. The metal bite echoed louder than his protests. Days later, the courthouse filled with the scratch of pens and the shuffle of boots. Edna Whitlow sat at the witness stand, hands folded tight, her voice trembling only at the start before finding its steel. She spoke of nights the kitchen light burned until dawn, of hearing muffled sobs through her lavender rose, of leaving bread on the stoop that the girls were too afraid to claim. Jacko read, faced with his own charges, bowed his head and admitted to debts and threats, recounting Royce's talk of selling everything including the girls. The recordings played, Royce's own voice condemning him. Whole package, quick and easy, words that twisted the courtroom air, heavy with disgust. Noel Spears presented her reports, each page detailing neglect, malnutrition, forced labor. Sheriff Pike gave evidence of the surveillance chain, every image verified, every timestamp exact. Silas sat at the back, Valor at his feet, both still as statues while the judge's gavel struck. Royce Cutter was sentenced to many years in prison, with a permanent no-contact order barring him from Maisie and Mira for the rest of his life. His curses echoed through the chamber, but no one answered them. When the court adjourned, Silas looked down at Valor, who met his gaze with amber steadiness. The war in that house was over, but the work of healing, he knew, was only beginning. The bungalow on Sprague, once sagging under rot and rage, now bore the sounds of nails, saws, and measured laughter. Men from the base volunteered during off hours, and Silas himself climbed the roof with steady hands, replacing shingles that no longer had to whisper of leaks. Where once mildew and ash lived, now the scent of fresh paint and new wood drifted into the autumn air. The yard, cleared of broken bottles and weeds, welcomed rows of mint and lavender. In the center, 2 zinnias bloomed, their red heads bright against the gray siding. Maisie and Mira moved differently now. The twins, still small and thin from years of neglect, had begun to carry themselves with a kind of budding assurance. Maisie, precise and careful, loved her new notebook, where she copied household expenses with a seriousness beyond her years. Mira, more impulsive, insisted on adding little drawings beside each entry. A loaf of bread sketched next to $2, a crooked flower beside seed packet. They argued lightly over these additions, the kind of argument children are supposed to have, their voices softening the house that once held only silence or shouts. Silas refused to be savior. He chose instead to be present. He met with Harlan Keats and signed the trust that placed the deed in the twins' names. He left them a spending ledger and promised to sit with them monthly to review it. "Your choices, your home, your future," he said. Maisie bit her pen and nodded gravely. Mira asked if she could draw butterflies in the margins, and Silas grinned. Butterflies belong anywhere. Dr. Nancy Creel entered their lives as both neighbor and healer. In her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled into a perpetual bun and spectacles perched on a nose sprinkled with freckles, she carried an air of brisk competence softened by warmth. She ran the community clinic near Fairchild Air Force Base and had spent years treating military families, veterans, and children who carried scars not visible to the eye. Nancy spoke directly, her tone firm but threaded with care. When she first sat across from Maisie and Mira, she let them braid the fringe of her scarf as she asked questions not about pain, but about dreams. Slowly, their answers grew from shrugs into sentences, from sentences into giggles. Valor adapted as though he had always been meant for this chapter. On the porch, he lay with paws crossed, amber eyes sweeping the yard like a sentry. In sessions with Nancy, he rested his head gently on a trembling knee, steadying the twins until words came. For Silas, Valor was anchor and mirror, catching in his gaze the soldier's unspoken doubts and answering with silent assurance. He became, as Nancy noted once, a second heart beating in the house. One afternoon, Nancy brought with her a rescue dog from the shelter, a droopy-eared hound mixed with brindle patches and a nose that sniffed at everything with ridiculous enthusiasm. The girls named him Ink because when he wagged his tail near a paint can, he splattered dots across the porch like handwriting. Ink was everything Valor was not clumsy, where Valor was graceful, loud where Valor was quiet, but his joy was infectious. His bark rang bright in the rooms, startling laughter from the twins until they tumbled against each other in delight. Valor tolerated the newcomer with patient dignity, allowing Ink to bounce circles around him as if a jester had arrived to guard the throne. The seasons turned and spring painted the yard alive. Flowers stretched toward the sun, butterflies found the zinnias, and Maisie and Mira stood proudly with dirt on their knees, showing Silas their map taped on the kitchen wall. Drawn in Mira's crooked lines and Maisie's careful labels, it marked the well, the mint rose, the lavender corner, and a circle on the porch labeled Silas and Valor's chair. Silas touched the paper gently, voice low. Then that's where we'll always be. The house learned to breathe again. In the evenings, Silas knocked 3 times and waited for 2 small knocks in reply, a ritual that now carried joy rather than fear. The kitchen shelves filled with borrowed library books, the windmill still spun on the porch, and the chime of children's laughter replaced the thud of bottles. Rescue, Silas understood, was not a single moment but a commitment that grew roots, one that required time, patience, and love willing to stay. When a soldier and his loyal dog decide not to turn away, 2 girls discover that safety and love can grow again, even in the rubble of fear. Rescue is not just about breaking chains. It's about building something strong enough to last, brick by brick, day by day. Perhaps the question isn't whether heroes exist, but whether each of us is willing to step forward when the time comes. If you were standing at that fence, would you knock 3 times and wait for an answer? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your voice. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and subscribe so that more people can find hope through these stories.